Welcome to the special anniversary edition of Daily Dose of Aramaic. It's hard to believe, but for the past year, we have been studying biblical Aramaic together. Grammar, syntax, and of course, we've been reading biblical Aramaic texts. So for this special anniversary edition, we've come here to New Orleans, to the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience. And I'd like to introduce the curator, Dr. Tina Rusala.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about the museum?
Sure. So the museum actually was founded in the 1980s in Utica, Mississippi, which is very close to Jackson, Mississippi, at a Jewish summer camp. So there was a place there that Jewish people would go to over the summer to drop off their children, and the children would stay during the summer, have a nice camp. But people would also bring objects to that place that had something to do with their Southern Judaism that were in peril of being destroyed. A synagogue would close, or someone would pass away, and they would have these objects and didn't know what to do with them. And so they thought, we'd bring it to this one place, and then someone could take care of them. So that happened for a while, and then at some point in the early 2000s, they thought, well, why don't we start an official museum and a place where everyone can see these objects? So they decided to move to New Orleans because there are a lot of Jewish people living here. You can get tourists that come here and visit this museum. And so a couple of years ago, they brought all of the objects to New Orleans. And in 2021, only a year ago, we opened up this new building and opened up this museum, which tells the story of Southern Jews. So it's a very specific topic. It talks about Jews living in the American South that have different stories than, for example, Jews living in New York or in Hollywood, and their particular situations that they encountered when they arrived here in the 1700s, all the way up to the modern age.
So Dr. Rusala, one of the things that our viewers are particularly interested in is the influence of Aramaic upon Jewish civilization from biblical times, and now is there any continuing influence, such as with one of your artifacts here in the museum?
Funny you should ask. Yes, we have this ketubah here, and a ketubah is a wedding certificate, a document that is signed by the rabbi who oversees the wedding, and then by the bride and groom and two witnesses. And so traditionally, these ketubot, plural, have always been written in Aramaic, since that was the lingua franca of the time of when this tradition started to happen in the 2nd century BCE. All the way up to now. And so we know that Hebrew was used in synagogue, in service as a religious language, while Aramaic was the language of the people. And so this was a civil document, so they decided to start writing it in Aramaic, and that is still the case. In many congregations around the world, these wedding contracts are still written in Aramaic.
Well, let's take a little bit of a closer look at the text of the ketubah.
So this ketubah was donated by Devin Payette, who gave us this document that was used by his parents at their wedding. So it is signed on the left side in English by the parents, Louis Payette and Sandra Slipakov, who were married in 1961 right here in New Orleans. And so even here in New Orleans, they decided to have an Aramaic ketubah, which is the one that we're going to take a closer look at today.
So let's take a look at some of the wording of this ketubah using our biblical Aramaic knowledge to try to figure it out. So right here, this first word, you can see a vav at the beginning, and then do you see what the verb root is? It's the yod, he, beit, the giving verbal root. And then at the end, how do you explain that na ending, the nun, kametz, aleph? Well, after biblical times, this particle, just like in Hebrew, sometimes got stuck on the end of verbal forms for kind of a modal sense. So in this case, it looks like it's forming kind of a cohortative idea with the participle. Now, why can Aramaic use a participle right here? Well, it's because earlier in the ketubah, the ana, the first common singular pronoun, was used. So continuing on after that, we know who the subject is. So the groom is saying, I am giving. And it's this cohortative idea. So it's a promise for the future of what he's doing. So I am giving. And the next word is very interesting too, because you see the lamed preposition at the front, and then you have a key ending, the kaf hirik yod. Now, if you look in Biblical Aramaic for Biblical Interpreters, page 61, there's a table there of suffix pronouns, and you notice that the second feminine singular is grayed out. Why is that? It's because that suffix does not show up in Biblical Aramaic. But as we can see here, it's a part of the living language of the time. So, giving to you, second feminine singular. Giving to you what? This next word, mohar, right there is bride price. It's a technical term. And then you see this word also ends in a second feminine singular suffix. This is of your virginity. So your, second feminine singular again. And then this word is pretty recognizable, especially for people who have studied Hebrew before. Kaf samik pei, silver. And then zuzeh. What is a zuz? A zuz is a half shekel of silver. And then finally, this is a bit of a different spelling than what we expect from Biblical Aramaic, but it's the word 200. So altogether, the groom is providing for the bride. So in the case of his death, for some reason the marriage ends, the bride has 200 zuzin to care for her. And this is a pretty significant component and really the motivating reason for the whole ketubah to begin with. And it's just interesting to me as I look at the English side that these kind of details are summarized rather than included in the English side, but it's preserved in the Aramaic tradition. I'd like to thank the worldwide viewers of Daily Dose of Aramaic for a wonderful first year. Let's resolve together that in this coming year, we will read the Bible in the original languages, Hebrew, Greek, and of course, Aramaic.